Hi everyone, thank you for being here today. I just want to start by saying that neither Manoj nor I are experts on technology. If anything, my greatest achievement is being able to run my computer. So that speaks to a lot of my, my ability to navigate technology. But what we have thought about and things that we have considered about and questions that we will be engaging with today is thinking about the question of caste within the context of data and privacy. So the sort of expanse of our discussion today will speak to how caste is and has always been the sort of building blocks for data in India. We want to then very briefly speak about how this has acquired a sort of digital form. And we also want to, in doing so, reflect on the politics of creating data, data collection, and the various ways in which data has been both used to challenge and entrench caste-based hierarchies. My work, of course, is on questions of policing. I don't see policing and caste as being two separate entities, so it's work on casteist policing and not caste and policing as a lot of people like to refer to it. And so I will reflect on how data and data building is a crucial part of the creation, entrenchment, and replication of casteist policing in India. And Manoj is here, of course, recently published, much acclaimed book on caste and law, an area of study and inquiry that most lawyers are yet to apply their mind to. So very excited to be in conversation, Manoj.
Thank you. I am also very excited to interact with somebody who's so deeply involved in policing. And this is all the more because my research and writing on the subject taught me how, when it comes to caste, it's not just about police. Practically every section of society is deeply uncomfortable talking about it. We recognize, not all of us, the more discerning, the more honest ones recognize the reality of caste. But as for most people, there is this illusion that this is something we've got over it. We are in a state of denial. So one of the aspects that I got to research was, the intersection of law and race in US and the intersection of law and caste in India. One of the things that struck me was that there's far greater acknowledgement of that reality of the persistence of race in the US than is the case in India of the corresponding persistence of caste. This shows in many ways, and let me, at this point mention that right now, as a journalist, it is very natural for me to think of what's on top of people's minds, which we call newspeg. Newspeg for this debate is the ongoing litigation, first in the Patna High Court not too long ago. Early this month, there was a judgment, which many saw as a very progressive judgment. And then there's a challenge to that in the Supreme Court from an organization called Youth for Equality. The judgment of the Patna High Court was a green signal to the Bihar government's proposal of carrying out a caste census. You may recall that about a decade ago, in 2011, this was attempted for the first time, or rather, it was revived after a lapse of many decades. The last caste census was done way back in 1931, and then there was anyway an interruption because of the World War. There was no 41 census really, and then 51 onwards, after we became a republic, it was decided that because we had reservations, affirmative action essentially for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes at the national level, we will be collecting data only on those two communities. So there was a decision that there will be no need to take, do a caste, to get a sense of caste demographics across the board, right? But then post 90, after this Mandal decision was made, when reservations for SEBCs or OBCs as they are called, who are essentially Shudra, part of the Shudra community, Shudra Varna. As you all know, there are 4 Varnas. Shudra is the 4th Varna. It doesn't mean they are 1/4. The top 3 Varnas, the elite Varnas, the twice-born Varnas, they are actually very few in number. It's the dominant section of India's population is really Shudras. And in that Shudra Varna, the lower segment is the OBCs. The upper segment are are what are called intermediate castes, right? So now, when the decision was made to extend affirmative action to OBCs at the national level and then subsequently in various states, especially in the north, it was for the first time. The need for accurate data on this was felt. Just as there was some information, some data available for SCs and STs, there should be something for OBCs also, because after all, so much of resources is being devoted to them. We need to have a sense of what are the achievements, what are the failings, is it working, or how it can be fine-tuned, and so on and so forth. But far from recognizing that logic, what was being said again and again by people in the current dispensation, especially because the decision to revive the caste census was taken by the previous government, Manmohan Singh government. But then before they got around to announcing the data, there were some issues about, apparently there were errors and so on. Before they could sort out those things, there was a change of government. Now this government is very clear in its head that there will be no such data put out. And as it happened, the 2021 census anyway could not take place this time because of COVID. And as far as the 2011 data is concerned, no, we don't want to put it out because it's going to be divisive. Some might find it ironic that this government finds caste demographics information divisive and not much of what they are themselves doing. So that prompted some of the other parties, most importantly Congress, to take the position that, okay, we have a few states where we are ruling, so Karnataka and elsewhere, so we will try and do some census there. Stalin, the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, said he would do it. And Nitish Kumar beat them all by coming out with this proposal last year, and it was being rolled out this year when it became a subject of litigation. Now, the important thing is, sorry, should I complete the point?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. There was something very interesting that happened when the matter came before the Supreme Court after the Patna High Court gave its green signal. The written submissions that this Youth for Equality made before the Supreme Court says that the Mandal judgment, the one that led to the, gave the green signal to the 1990 decision of the VP Singh government of introducing reservations for OBCs. Now the Mandal judgment needs reconsideration, is what this Youth for Equality says, to the extent it holds that affirmative action can be based on caste. Now I found that very significant because when it goes on to say, no person can be attributed a religion or caste as a birthmark. The individual's choice of faith, belief, and nature of work cannot be taken away by the circumstances of birth. The fixing of caste by birth is perpetuation of jati and is antithetical to varna. Now the distinction they are making between jati and varna is actually a trope that goes back 2 centuries. When I did this book, which was referred to just now, Caste Pride, Battles for Equality in Hindu India, the battles I'm referring to are battles that were fought in the legal sphere. This is about the intersection of law and caste. So these are all battles that were fought in legislatures and courts, right? So, and these are not battles between, say, upper caste and lower caste. When I say it's in Hindu India, what I meant was that these were battles essentially between 2 sets of Hindus, liberal, progressive Hindus, and conservative, obscurantist Hindus. Now, the latter's position was consistently, that in the early decades of, in the 19th century and early decades of the 20th century, during the colonial period, was that, look, this is all, they were very unabashed in claiming that Varna system was all about birth, where it's all birth based. And on the other side, those who try to give a liberal interpretation to our scriptures, try to make it closer to the conception of class, where there is some mobility. But then the problem was, both were engaging in some wishful thinking when they would say in subsequent decades that our scriptures were not really so rigid, that they were not so unfair to lower castes, because of late, the ones who represented the Hindu right during the colonial period have been singing a different tune. They often say in Bhagavad Gita, there is this quote, there is this sloka which says that caste is Krishna is quoted as saying that I created Varna system on the basis of guna and karma. Now this was interpreted to mean that if you display a certain guna and karma, you could on that basis belong to whichever caste that is applicable to you. But in reality, there is no such mechanism, there's no such process, there is no such precedent either.
No, I'm interrupting you here, Manoj, because I also think it's important to say is how this idea of guna, karma, then translates itself to law making of a certain kind through the Manusmriti, right? Which is speaking to, what is considered to be the code of conduct for people who are based, depending on where you are located within the caste system. And at the same time, if you were to not toe the line, then what is the kind of punishment that should be meted out to you for not adhering to the prescribed caste boundaries?
Yeah, absolutely. One glaring example of there being absolutely no basis to this guna karma face saver that the Hindu right has come up with in recent years is, say, the great Shivaji. Right from medieval period, we don't know how it was prior to that, but we have this historically recorded example of Shivaji, who, by any reckoning, ticked all the boxes of being a great Kshatriya. He was acclaimed as an all-time great warrior. He was also seen as a visionary administrator. And yet, the Brahmins of his kingdom refused to anoint him as Chhatrapati, a post that he wanted, after escaping from the clutches of Aurangzeb in Agra. When he returned to his kingdom, for strategic reasons, he said, now I should be in a position to deal on equal terms with the Mughal emperor. I want to be anointed as Chhatrapati, but Brahmins of his kingdom refused. So he had to get somebody all the way from Benares to somehow circumvent that. The reason that the Brahmins of his kingdom refused was a very fancy theory that whatever the scriptures may say about the four varnas, that are there, the Chaturvarna, in Kali Yuga, there are only two varnas. This is the claim that Brahmins made right from Shivaji's days onwards. They said that there are only Brahmins, that is, the elite, who are imbued with qualities of sattva, and then there are these Shudras, the servile community, who are steeped in tamas. So there was, in India, according to them, their own narrative, there was nobody really with rajas, the martial qualities, the qualities that were required to protect
Manoj,
India and
yeah.
all that, right? So this is a kind of, self-defeating claim that they made, and this came to light in the 19th century when these debates that I was referring to in courts, there was actually a case which went all the way to Privy Council. Sorry, let me complete this point.
Yeah.
Because it's a very interesting example. It's very revealing. Those who want details, you'll find them in this book. Now, that Privy Council judgment, it was on a case that came from Bihar, had to go into this question where these people, Rajputs, who were reduced to appearing before these white judges in London, asking them, look, you please tell us, do we still exist or not? Do we Kshatriyas still exist in this Kali Yuga, in this modern age or not? Why are we asking this? Because Brahmins are saying that there are only Brahmins and Shudras, because it was very self-serving. It meant that the rest of the Hindu society was all, way down in the hierarchy. They were all impure, and these guys were the only pure ones. Man, they were very assertive about their own heritage and said, we still exist. So it was that Privy Council which had to give that ruling in 1850s, and then on the other twice-born Varna, that is Vaishyas, the Banya community, the business community, they too had to go get a ruling. And this was from Bombay High Court. It was from none other than Justice Ranade, who's otherwise a social reformer.
Manoj, I'm going to have to come in here because I think they're waiting with bated breath for us to come to data.
Yeah.
So we will put them out of their sense of anticipation. No, but when you say about the caste census, and I want to pick up on that because, of course, Youth for Equality, ironically, an ironically named body, one of the things that they argued in the Supreme Court is that, having caste census or an exercise of this kind has the potential to make caste, which is a very private kind of exercise, a public matter, right? Thrusting it into the public domain, to which the bench responded and said that, everybody knows each other's caste, people also know their neighbor's caste, so what are you saying? So, and I want to, and also drawing from something that you said, right, about caste as a birthmark. I want to build on that idea in terms of how the police has been able to do this through data collection, right? Police and policing. And a sort of really glaring example of, caste as being a birthmark and the sort of encoding of that through data has happened through the Criminal Tribes Act. But before I come to that, I want to speak a little bit about how data collection has always been, and when I say data collection, I don't mean just, data as an abstract entity, but caste as data, right? So understanding of caste, entrenching of caste, building on one's understanding of caste has been very, very crucial. Through data has been very crucial, a crucial part of the policing project. Because, so much of, and there is this fantastic work for those who haven't read, Radha Kumar's book called Police Matters. She speaks to very, very eloquently about the kind of data collection that the police was doing in the early colonial period, where data is, police data becomes the sort of crux of understanding governmentality, right? So, how districts are to be reshaped, how many police stations will be where, all of this is on the basis of the kind of data that the police is generating. And the police is also, it's an incredibly smart institution. I think we've been really unfair to them. Because they have always been very good with knowing where their priorities lie. So in 1902, when the police commission was set up, although, the police as an agency, as a body, was always been, as they would say, understaffed, right? So the number of people you're policing, the population that you're policing, and the number of police personnel, that ratio has been quite skewed. But what the 1902 Police Commission report did and said is that we must cut down on police beats, so this daily patrolling, because what we are interested in doing, and which is central to the project of policing, is that we want to create spaces and people who need to be policed. And it's the creation of those object of policing which has happened through data, and which has happened through this data which is located in caste, right? And to build on this further, I want to speak to, this sort of colonial invention, because again, one of the things that we really like doing, particularly as lawyers, is to say that the starting point of everything is coloniality, right? So everything was great, and then the British came in and then destroyed our perfectly lovely world. But the British came in, and not particularly innovative chaps, right? So they were doing, in other British colonies, their habitual offenders, criminal classes, all of it. So they come here and they say, we need to replicate this here, and they didn't have to put in too much effort because the caste system was there, right? So they started by saying, we want to there is a category of people, they say this is the first colonial invention of crime, which is the creation of the category of a thuggy. And they said a thuggy, it began with a really specific definition to say is a person, is a robber who strangulates their victims with a silk scarf. So very specific. And then central to this project of saying we need a thuggy is the setting up of what are called thuggy and dakati departments. So what do thuggy and dakati departments do? They collect data on people who they see as thugs, right? And a useful and a very important part of this characterization are people who are wandering. Because the idea is that people who are constantly on the move are very hard to watch, are very hard to discipline. And these also happen to be people who don't fall within the fourfold caste hierarchy, right? So the ones that you would call as being avarna, or we would refer to as tribes, so nomadic, semi-nomadic in nature, to say these are the people that we need to watch and what is the kind of information that they collect, right? So they're collecting intelligence on names, characters, manners of speech, signs that thugs use to identify each other. All of these things is information that they're collecting. But what is very interesting to note here is that you're only collecting information on a certain kind of people, right? So while the purported project is to say we want to find data on criminality, it is already this existing idea of criminality which is informing the collection of data. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're already seeing a certain kind of people as being criminals and being worthy of being policed, right? And then this category doesn't work out very well for them because it keeps growing and growing until one day, some thuggy department decides to declare Brahmins as thugs, right? Which is obviously a terrible idea. We can never say out aloud that Brahmins are thugs. It's an open secret that we must all live with. But so they say Brahmins are thugs, which is when they're done for. And they said, now we have to shut down this enterprise. And so then the thuggy department falls apart and it gives rise to the old definition of criminals by birth when you go back to the good old wandering people. And that is what has given rise to what we understand as policing in the modern sense, right? Because the Criminal Tribes Act allows for the crux of it is, you are a criminal by birth, and it's not just individuals. I want to stress on this, and we will, discuss this as we go along, is the idea of a family being a criminal, right? So people are put into settlements, and a crucial part of this exercise is the maintenance of criminal tribes registers, which has some really granular information on who you are, who your friends are, what do these people look like, tracking their movements, taking roll calls, multiple times taking roll calls, all of this information which then becomes a part of this register. We continue to know this now, obviously popular culture has popularized this kind of language. History sheet, rowdy sheet, gunda registers. So terms like history sheeter, rowdy sheeter, gunda sheeter, the next time we use them to describe somebody who we don't think fits in line with what social norms are, we need to remember what is the origin story of this, right? And Radha Kumar also says how in Tamil Nadu there are registers like the Marava register, which is a caste. So a criminal tribe register comes to be called the Marava register. Now, it also speaks to the spectacle of surveillance, right? Because this is data that is purportedly being generated for surveillance. But this is data which is also made public. So everybody knows there is a Marava register. It's made public. Everybody knows who's on that register. Everybody knows who a criminal tribe is. And everybody knows, because it's also very spatially demarcated, right? So it's also, and I mean, in the earlier conversation, the one that Shivangi was on, she was speaking about criminal hotspots, right? Crime hotspots. Think of it as your OG crime hotspot, where you're seeing that, these are spaces that we are going to confine certain communities to certain spaces. And then because those communities are inhabiting those spaces by default become unsafe spaces. So how the idea of, coalescing, existing as a person belonging to an oppressed caste community then becomes synonymous with being unsafe and therefore the category of crime, right? So I feel like it's really important to look at and see this history of data collection, because I also want to push back against this idea, which is very, very often floated, and particularly in the last, over a decade or so, which is that, this, data contributes to bias. Data contributes to bias. I'm really sick of this, because the data has always been biased. The data is caste. It is not pushing for a bias. It was meant to be an encoding of that and evidence of that. So it's really important for us to bear that in mind when we're saying the data is biased, because it allows us to, and allows for some people then to come and say, oh, let's think about what would a reformed caste system look like, right? What would it look like? It would still be violent,
Nikita, may I come in here?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Something about this data collection. What I can't resist saying at this point is this instance of how India started collecting data on Dalits. They were called depressed classes then, for the first time as a result of a resolution that was proposed in Parliament, or what was then called Imperial Legislative Council in 1916. For many years, there was such, as I said earlier, there's such hypocrisy about caste. It's a reality, but we pretend that we've all transcended it, we know nothing about it, right? Now, this is not a modern phenomenon. It was there earlier too. And this began with, say, the very founding of Indian National Congress. As you all know, Congress was founded in 1885. In 1886, the then president of Congress, Dadabhai Nauroji, laid down a policy for Congress saying that there will be no discussion on caste. There will be no resolutions relating to caste before Congress. We will focus only on political issues, nothing on social issues. So, and therefore, for many decades, there was no discussion on it. As a result of that, Congress members who were part of the legislature never broached this subject at all. It was left to an unknown Parsi legislator who was not from the Congress, called Manekji Dadaboy, again another Dadaboy, whose role was just the reverse of what the earlier Dadaboy said. He was the one who proposed it. And there was vehement opposition to it from prominent Congress leaders who were the Hindu right of the time. Madan Mohan Malviya, Surendranath Banerjee, who were at different times presidents of Congress party. They opposed any discussion on it, saying that you're offending our religious feelings. Let's not have any discussion on untouchability. This is not a subject that should be discussed at all before the legislature. But the colonial administration said, okay, since there is such vehement opposition to it, they persuaded Manekji Dadabhai to withdraw the resolution, but promised to act on it, the substance of it. As a result, they began to then start collecting data for the first time. They sent out a circular to all the states, please collect data on these depressed classes to understand what kind of disabilities they face, what kind of measures, special measures can be taken to ameliorate their lot. So all that began after this discussion. And in 1919, Madras for the first time set up what is known as Protector of Depressed Classes, which was the earliest prototype of what we see today as, say, Ministry of Social Empowerment or Commission for Scheduled Castes and so on. That was the earliest body. So that is when we began to collect data. But then you see how at that time in 1916, there was such unease, such discomfort betrayed by caste Hindus to the collection of data on Dalits. And here in 2023, we see similar discomfort being displayed by caste Hindus to collection of data on OBCs, the lower Shudras, again in relation to ameliorating their lot, to see how the affirmative action is working. But you come up with all sorts of reasons.
Manoj,
one reason
I
is
think
you can't force caste entity on us, as if we don't have caste as a reality. It is because of this affirmative action that you have made us conscious of caste.
No, I think the OBC, of course, getting data on OBCs would shift a lot of things around, because it's a category that is perhaps one of the most heterogeneous categories, right? So Dalit Muslims, Dalit Christians, tribes, everybody that they couldn't put anywhere are there. But I think the anxiety about having this data is twofold. One is that I think it really bursts the bubble of certain groups who have for a very long time historically masqueraded as the general category, aka the casteless category. So it allows us to name and assign caste to those who have always spoken about caste only in terms of Dalits, Adivasis, or Shudras. And secondly, it also speaks to how that castelessness or the existence of being an upper caste / casteless body has allowed them to amass resources and opportunities disproportionate to their numbers within the overall population.
And it gives, and there's a danger of it giving a lot of political traction to
Yeah.
a very loaded term, that is Bahujan.
Bahujan, yeah, yeah.
And
That
then,
we are the
and then the solidarity of Dalits and Bahujans.
Yeah.
So all those kind of,
solidarity is being built.
pressure from below coming up and, blowing up this narrative. All those things are
I
what
think
they
it
are,
really turns this
apprehending.
idea of, what we've been saying, this is majoritarian rule. It actually turns that narrative on its head to say that it's actually the rule of the minority.
Yeah, the elite
It's the
minority
rule
at
of
the
a
top.
really handful of minority who are calling the shots in multiple ways. And then what it does is it bursts your bubble in terms of this category of the Hindu, because you realize that it's actually just a conglomeration of castes.
Yeah.
And then I think it's that make-believe category and not pushing for that make-believe category to be dispelled and doing, safeguarding that is what the entire project is about. Because otherwise, data collection is their favorite job. Hyderabad, and there's a lot of work that has happened on Hyderabad. And Srinivas is here, so he can speak to this. But one of the...
Signaling to us too.
Yeah, we'll take a minute because there was a break. So the idea, when Telangana became an independent state, one of the first surveys that they did was the comprehensive family survey, right? It's very important to pay attention to, it was supposed to be a civic survey on 94 parameters, but conducting a survey like that, mapping people's family trees also tells you who is placed where in the caste hierarchy, right? And then that data then becomes the basis of all programs, policing, social welfare, all of it. So it's that sort of marking of bodies that has been an exercise that, you're not going to call it the caste census, but you're still doing that and you're using that data to do precisely what the caste census would have done.
Yeah. So should we?
I think we should close and open for Q&A.
Yeah.
Time. So we'll just take one question, and I see one hand already up before I stood up. So, Shaila? Okay, we'll take both together. A request, please keep it as brief as possible and only questions. Any insights, please do share with the speakers after the event.
Right. Thank you for the session. It was really great. I'm Janvi. My question is from a sociological point of view. It is when you talk about the intermingling of the words Bahujan and Dalit and Adivasi, and now solidarity has turned into an intersectional talk of allyship, so to say. Within that, what would be your comment on in your interpersonal spaces, you use the vocabulary of that to be subliminally casteist or to be subliminally non-progressive, but now you have gained progressive ontology, which also, just one second, goes on to a policy framework in terms of how the EWS reservation came into play and how it was talked about and how it was looked at. So do you have comments about that?
We'll quickly take the question at the back, and that's it. Sorry, we've run over time.
Thank you, Nikita, for bringing Telangana. I think when you look at caste and data and census, right, recent with SECC and the Bihar census going to courts, right? When we talk about the upcoming census, so we know Telangana census was kind of new, but if you look at it critically, it's the end of census, right? Like you're through linking Aadhaar from your birth and death, you don't want to do 10-year census anymore. You want to track every individual from their birth to death. Yeah. We are being marked, stamped, demarcated, our bodies are being tracked. Now, what is it that you would think of a future of end of census? when you're talking about colonial procedures and the historical aspects of caste and census, it's been completely replaced. I can't think of it. I have to accept it. I don't understand it enough to imagine a world where you're ending census. The census of 2024 is going to be the end, right? Now, what would caste and how, what sort of location, when you talk about census, again, you're also demarcating boundaries. This is again coming back to delimitation of 26. So your thoughts on this would be great.
Thank you for the questions. Yeah. Anyone?
I'm not sure if I understood your question. Broadly, the sense I get is that it makes us conscious of something that we, in the interest of citizenship, modernity, should not be thinking so much about, should not be so conscious about. Is that what you mean?
I meant when you use vocabulary like that to be subliminally casteist in ways and to cover it up. So I'm not sure if I'm framing it well, but now you have the vocabulary of solidarity and allyship, but in your everyday you're not making actual changes to not socialize within caste circles, to not.
Okay. Okay, let me tell you at this point, I'm not a pundit, I'm a storyteller. So I have a story that comes to my mind is that when we abolished untouchability, even at that time, the discussion was, look, untouchability, there were some people in the Constituent Assembly who pointed out that untouchability is actually a symptom. The disease is caste. So why are we not attempting to abolish caste? So the answer to that, there was even a committee that was set up, Divakar committee, R.R. Divakar committee, to explore this question. And the conclusion they came to was that, look, how do we ameliorate the lot of the ones who have been victims of caste system unless we recognize them as those who belong to that low position in that hierarchy. So there is no getting away from it. So this is a reality that we have to bear. Even if ideally we would not want to think. And those who are in denial over caste, as is commonly said, it's a bit of a cliche, that you are actually betraying your own privileged position. So for those who are at the receiving end of caste, they have no option but to be dealing with the mal effects of it and constantly grappling with that issue, that beast. So it's a very difficult situation to be in. There is something similar going on in the US too. There's no pat reply to that, but that's where it is. That's the best I can say.
You can answer the second.
Yeah. Srinivas, if I understand your question correctly, your question is about, what happens with the end of the census, right? And how, so I think that, and of course, with Hyderabad.
I haven't understood. What is this end of census?
I think your question is that after 2024, there will be no further. Is that what you're saying? That's the last time that, they haven't done the census for over a decade now anyway.
You're profiling individuals from their birth. You
Yeah.
don't need a census anymore.
Okay, you're saying it's become a redundant exercise.
They won't do it either. The
Yeah.
plan has always been this.
Yeah.
They've been
So,
very clear.
no, but I think that's the idea,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think the census was perhaps the only form of data collection which one can say is a data collection that is drawing attention to or spelling out structures of power, right? Every other form of data collection is derived from and used to entrench that same system. And I think what they've been able to do that as a ruse, and particularly with technology and just in Hyderabad, the kind of madness that is there with, you're constantly collecting data of different kinds. You're also now merging data, so it's a great mix and match with things like the Mission Chabutra, where you're saying wandering youths, people who are sitting in their mohalla, you're picking them up, you're taking their fingerprints. So it's already that collection of data, using that data to create disciplined bodies, disciplined bodies who will toe the line. That was always the plan, right? Is you don't need to actually now, the era of the policeman hitting people with a lathi is gone. The lathi has been replaced with tabs. In Hyderabad, everybody says the Telangana police walks around with tabs. So I think that kind of meaning making with making data and data collection omnipresent has then allowed for them to sort of make this case to say that why is a separate data collection exercise required, one. And secondly, what that then does is then that makes and centers, like one is entrenches obviously the margins, but also, you know, obfuscates the idea of what is it that is pushing for this to happen, right? Like what I was saying earlier, that obviously caste is an evolving category and certain people have been casteless, and the fact that now there is no record of them in any way, then allows for that castelessness to be further naturalized, right? To say, oh, you know, this particular X location is a really safe location, I feel so good there, and that that area is a problem. Or, you know, if you see a certain kind of person, and then you say ki, मतलब this person has a record. Now you can very clearly say, देखो आप उसका fingerprint लगाएंगे तो पता चलेगा 100% rowdy sheeter है. So that kind of navigation of people's world and world making is already happening, and the way that, you know, I and my colleagues at the CPA project see it, what we are seeing is now the rise and the creation of what we see as the digital caste panopticon, right? It has always been the panopticon of caste, now it is the digital caste panopticon, and the only sort of antithesis to it is having counter data, which is in the form of census, and which is why the state has come down on it in order to suppress the data in the kind of consistent and concerted manner that they have.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking such a pertinent yet unexplored issue